Good morning, everyone. It is June 23rd. I am calling this meeting to order. This is our regular meeting part of the day. Do I have a motion to establish the agenda as posted?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of establishing the agenda as posted, please say aye.
Aye.
Oh, sorry, I forgot we have a student rep.
She's not sworn in
She's not
yet.
sworn in yet.
She's not
Okay.
sworn in. You're good.
Okay. Okay, thank you. All opposed say nay. That passes by a vote of 5-0. We have recognition. Are you going to do it as part of?
We can do it right now as part of recognition, and then I won't have to do superintendent report. But next to me is the incoming student representative to the board. So the junior representative has been selected. Her name is Asha Warner. And we're just really excited to have her on board. We went through a rigorous process, and it was a tough decision. We all came to consensus that Asha's going to be a great representative for all of you to get to work with over the next couple of years. My only regret is that I won't get to know her better. Asha, did you have anything you'd like to?
I'm really excited to get to know everyone, get to know how school board meetings run and how that works. I'm part of the school paper, so I'm excited to see how that's going to balance out and how I can maybe bring to light what happens here behind the scenes of the paper, and so students understand what's happening all the time with their administration. So yeah.
So our policy states that Asha will be officially sworn in at the first meeting in September, and then they will both be here for that student vote when it has to occur. So welcome.
Well, congratulations. Do we have any public input today?
No.
So, Michelle, no. Okay, no public input. So you don't need to do superintendent report in that case?
We have lots of other things.
Okay, great. Well, governance process monitoring. We have board policy 1800 OE1, student focused fundamentals. Fundamental 1, personalized learning.
So the final monitoring of the 5 fundamentals is fundamental 1, which we have for you today. And we do have some of our learning services staff here to go through this monitoring, both quantitative and qualitative data on fundamental 1, which does say more, but we define it as the personalized learning fundamental. And that being said, I will turn it over to learning services.
Great, thank you. As Andrews is pulling up the information there, this, as just a reminder, we have typically reviewed this in late September or October, kind of in conjunction with Fundamental 2, because we didn't have EPS data from last year to be able to provide you with that Vision Essential dashboard. We postponed it to June this year so that you could at least see the information and the perceptual data that came in this spring. Moving forward, as we've kind of started discussing preliminarily, and it will be part of the 1008 discussion, this is probably a good time to review this going forward this time of year as we're looking to wrap up the school year. The interpretation for this has largely been a summation of a number of different points from the EES surveys. And it's been combined into an essential dashboard is what it's called. So Andrews, if you would slide over to that. Nova, do you want to talk a little bit, just to reset the table about your conversations with Ronnie from the Center for Educational Effectiveness and some of her higher level kind of details that she's provided you as you've met with her?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest detail was the same one I shared last time, which is just that the scores went down across the board in all districts, not just in ours. So where we see scores lowered, she said that was not a shock to them in their data evaluation. She said she gave us some things to focus on in our work. So we have to dig into those this summer, hopefully, to kind of think about how we want to reframe our district improvement plan as we move forward. That's pretty much it.
And there's two ways that the information is provided. And a request from others was, sometimes it's a little hard to read all this information. So we've added in the 2022 into the bar for the bar graph there, so that you can see that the most recent survey is the one on top. And then it goes down from there. Just reminding everyone that we did have a year where we had skipped the survey, and so it's not completely chronological where the next one would be 2021. That's actually 2020 is the orange, because I'm on the right track, right? Okay, I'm trying to make sure my years are right. So that last one was right when the pandemic was setting in. We actually have just launched the survey, I believe, and then, or we were getting ready
We were
to
getting ready to close it.
close it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we're almost in that new baseline. I think another takeaway that I remember Nova sharing is, in some ways, we've kind of reset. It's almost like when the district moved from the measurement of student performance, the MSP, to the SBAC. You have that first year where it's a similar assessment, but it's very different in many ways. And so we kind of have a new normal. If you scroll down, Andrews, to the second way the information is provided, it's called the keep going. There we go. This is called the heat map. And what the heat map does is they then start presenting information relative to the information on Mercer Island School District. So if we go to the bottom of that particular chart right there, at the bottom, you can see the mean score and the way the information is provided. We can manipulate that data any way we want to make it look better or worse. And we've had them play around with that, but essentially it's showing us that the closer the scores are down to the lower the score, that 3.29, the darker the red. And then as it gets closer up towards kind of if you think of it like the range, you get towards that 4.38. That's where you get the more blues. And so we didn't reset this at all from year to year. We've always kept this the same, but it visually helps us to see where might be some areas of focus that we want to start thinking about. Now, within this is capturing the district as a whole. It's not capturing individual schools. So certain schools may not have this exact outlay. And so where their priority could be different than a different school within our district. And that's what's part of the school improvement planning. So just this past Tuesday, we started with some information. We presented kind of a claim to our team, and then had them start really digging into their particular student data, their staff data, their parent data, to really start thinking about where might they add areas of emphasis as we head into the new year. Not just on this fundamental, we were looking across several different inspection points, if you will. So with that, I'll turn it over to, well, let me ask Nova or anyone else, anything else we want to add to that. So let me just turn it over for questions or observations or conversation amongst the board.
Yeah, just a few questions. Like, one is, what's the participation rate for this data? And then two is more of an observation, looking at the 4 quadrants on the first page. Individualization seems to be the one where there's the largest declines, particularly if you take the last 2 questions for the safe, supportive, and vibrant learning environment, which really are more about individualization. Like, that seems to be at least one of the takeaways. But yeah, like participation rates, and then sort of apart from this survey data, do we capture any data when it comes to individualized learning plans apart from survey data? Like, for instance, incompletion rates during like certain course sequences, whether it's math or science, and then what the endpoints are, right? Like, do we have like the sequence of courses to the same sort of depth as other districts? Or is the survey data, for the time being at least, the only data that we capture when it comes to individualized learning plans or environments? The survey, I mean,
Do you mean from course to course, Director Glowitz? Is that what you mean?
Well, I guess let's
Or
take the
from-
easy one first in terms of like
Participation
participation
rate.
rate.
Yeah.
And then if like, also like you agree that it seems that the least, the largest area of declines in the survey data was in individualization.
I'm seeing, and I'm just double checking, Nova, I'm seeing 777 participants across the district for the
That's for
family.
families,
Is that families?
It's up about 100 from the previous time we did it.
And down about 100 from 18-19. So it would kind of in the middle of our last two representations.
So that's like 1 in 5, 1 in 6.
Possibly,
Actually, families
although,
are probably
Families,
like,
like,
yeah,
multiple kids.
so it's hard to
1
say.
in 4 maybe.
At best, is on the family side. So if
So
that,
that would be reflective as the parent, obviously.
Yeah.
And remember, the student data is collected 4th through 12th. So we don't have our very youngest students taking this, but we do have, it's given to the students during the school day.
But we had about 500 more students this time around than the last time around, and part of that is because the window hadn't closed, not all people have been able to administer it yet.
so
Then
that's-
about like other like sort of other data that we may capture from the survey, do we currently, or is it sort of the focus historically been on the survey data?
it's been more on this, for this particular fundamental on that,
Okay, and this is also like the company that's doing the survey data was the same one that reviewed HiCap in 2018, is that
yeah.
correct?
This is the one, yeah.
Okay. That's what I thought.
And one thing, so something we've thought about, and I don't know, Nova, I don't want to get too far out in front of kind of the thinking that we've had, but they have improved their tools drastically, I would say. And you had a chance to meet with Ronnie and learn a little bit more. It could be a future study session to bring them back in. We haven't done that for a long time. We're gonna do it with our leadership team because we've got new leaders. We have new principals since we had originally done this. In fact, with the retirement of David Hoffman, we only have Mary Jo and Aaron down at the middle school, who probably were here when we last did our biggest training. And so we're going to be bringing them in because they have lots of other reports. Nova, you want to talk a little bit about maybe some of those other things? And maybe it's too premature, so I don't want to put you on the
Yeah, I mean, I'm
spot
not gonna
right
go
in front of the board.
Not in much detail, but it's, they have a platform that we can go to and we can filter things in and out as we want to view things and disaggregate the data just to see sort of, is there a particular student group that is impacted more or less based on that? So that's something that we were looking at, Fred and I. And then, of course, principals just don't yet have access because that's a fairly new tool. And so we're looking to maybe get them into that a bit more. They talked about it on Tuesday, whenever we met. Tuesday.
And for like iReady, to what extent would that allow us, if we so choose to sort of extend beyond survey data, allow us to track growth and progress, at least at, you know, those grade levels that are utilizing that tool?
Yeah, so we can totally do that. In fact, that's part of the plan in terms of what we're building for our PD plan and rollout plan and all of that. So that'll be part of our process, is identifying where the markers will be to identify whether or not the tool is helping support student growth.
And they have some, you know, iReady has really, they started out really as more of an assessment platform than they were full curriculum. And that's what they've added over time. But they do, unlike AimsWeb and some of the others out there, they actually do some more, they have more tools and resources that actually go all the way up into high school or in some instances. So, you know, it's really the difference between a curriculum-based measurement where you're just, regardless of what curriculum you're using, you layer in a assessment tool to assess your students versus a curriculum-based measurement that is tied directly to the curriculum itself. And there's pros and cons to both, but that's one thing that's helped us out with AimsWeb is it's not been about Mondo. It hasn't been about letters. It has, you know, it's just about how are students doing. and benchmarking our elementary students, which is where we've made the most progress. over the
Yeah,
years.
I already, and AIMSWeb too, but AIMSWeb has less. AIMSWeb is more normative, general outcome measure, and then iReady has more curriculum-based measure, but also has general outcome measures. So there's sort of a mix of those things, whereas AIMSWeb is not necessarily, it's a lot more difficult to drill down to that for math in particular.
Or we could track, for instance, perhaps like growth, like from like the beginning to the end of the year, you know, what grade level was math and, you know, reading, you know, at the beginning, at the end, and just sort of say, hey, like, you know, this student learned like a lot, like this year, right?
Yeah.
That's something that,
Correct.
And we can
Yeah.
look across grade levels, how's the
Right.
third grade doing in the transition from reading to reading to learn area. There's another tool, and I apologize, guys, because I didn't bring this up, but I happened to see it being used with another board, and I went, "Oh, that's kind of cool." The homeroom tool actually has a board view that might be something that could be useful for future monitorings or tools for the board as well, because it's a repository, again, for student information. It doesn't show you individual students, but it will show you just, I think, what you're thinking about of a grade level or a subset of students, how are they doing in a particular area. So that might be another tool that might support monitoring.
What's
as
that
you
called?
adjust. It's the homeroom tool that interfaces with Skyward.
Yeah, we already have it. We use it. Whenever we prepare reports, we usually get the data out of that to prepare them for you. And all of our data goes into homeroom as it exists. So when we pull out like our dyslexia screening information, that gets out of homeroom, so that, because they built a spreadsheet out of that based on the data I gave them.
Go
And
on.
there's a board view in that, so
Yeah.
it might be something to pursue and then do a study session for the board on here's how you can look at this tool.
Yeah,
Um,
that seems like a really useful way to be able to look, at grade, interesting grade by grade, to be like, oh, like this curriculum's working really well for the third graders and maybe like less well for the fourth graders. So we might need to supplement with something, or we need to tweak how we're using it, you know, that seems like a really nice.
My only caution is just that obviously in year one, we're only rolling out a portion of grade levels.
Of
So
course. Yeah, but down the road.
yeah, no, I
I think
totally
long
agree.
term.
I think the other thing is just knowing that that's part of year one. Year one is really about being, you know, having fidelity to the tools so that we can identify the gaps to put in the supplements, which is the same thing we did with reading and we'll have to do again with reading. But I think in year one, it would be a little weird to look at. We could totally do it, but years 2 and beyond, we might see a lot more pattern.
I think where you're kind of going with this conversation, which is one we've been having that same conversation with learning services and Superintendent Kolosky, is just, you know, we've been monitoring fundamentals in certain ways over time. And I think where we're going with this is, what are other ways we might monitor this? And I think as we learn a little bit more about what the Center for Educational Effectiveness is offering, a potential future study session could be looking at fundamental one, let's say, and saying, is this, you know, what other information is out there? How might we discuss this? Which we would be definitely open to continuing that conversation as we evolve and get you new information there. Just stepping back with homeroom, the big company, it's not a huge company, but the company over homeroom is called School Data Solutions. And so to create a little comparison here, the Educational Effectiveness Survey, the EES, is to the Center for Education, is for the CEE, as homeroom is to School Data Solutions. And our former Executive Director of Learning Services, Jennifer Wright, that's the company she now works for and went to work for. And actually, she's going to be leading some professional development coming up in August.
August 25th.
Got it, with teachers.
So this will be readily accessible by teachers, is that the intent?
It has been.
It already
It
is, the
has been
homeroom
for
is
years.
already available to
For
teachers.
about 12, maybe 12-ish years they've had access.
But this is the first time with all the new data of student progress?
No, I would say for the last decade, we have had our matrices of data coming out for reading all plugged in. If teachers administer the MISD assessments in math, those are in there as well. Statewide level data, you know, in terms of their pathways, in terms of their Smarter Balanced or their WAIM or their WIDA or whatever, that's all in there too. Everything's in there.
So when we want to get a picture of a student profile, we can pull up all assessments they've taken in our district over time. We can run reports, we can do student growth percentiles, we can do it by teacher, we can do it by student, we can run it at any grade level. I mean, there's all kinds of things that teachers have access to that we've done for years and years. And that's generally how we then bring information here to report on.
So for instance, like when we like transition from like a pull out to a push in, like for math, then we should be able to track like growth rates for math for those students, and then just sort of see like if the data says anything about like one methodology like being preferable to another, at least for outcomes measured along that dimension.
Yes and no. The only thing that we really truly have, what I would say is comprehensive data in there is from Smarter Balanced, and that's only for the duration of Smarter Balanced, and then prior to that was, MSD. So in that regard, yes, but in terms of curriculum or general outcome measures, that's not in there because that hasn't been an expectation of all teachers in our district until we move over to hopefully iReady, when it will become more of an expectation.
We're moving in that direction for that.
Yeah.
Already, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're a teacher who's in there, and so you've had access to homeroom since we have a teacher here.
I
Can we
have
put her on the spot?
homeroom to get any students that are at risk, because it also tracks attendance. So assessments, WIDA, all of those state assessments are very useful, but when you're trying to support the student and you can have access to these different pieces of information, that could also help support. In my role, it's just EL and Spanish, so if there's a question that I have, it's one other piece of the puzzle besides Skype with Schoology, caring conferences, so it's really helpful.
Okay. I have a couple of questions and some
Okay,
clarification.
you can't see most of my face.
So Fred, you were mentioning that, with this data, we could really organize it multiple ways, and it would be kind of interesting if, and this is just extra, it's not required, but since you were asking, you can see this in different ways. It would be interesting to see expectations of, staff, parents, and students, right? And seeing traditionally, how they see themselves and what are the gaps between the points. And then it will help us to prioritize, where we put our energy. We see the largest gaps, the drop is in students or parents, it just really helped drive our work. So that's, and I just want to clarify, I heard that we're going to use this data to revisit our district improvement plan. So I really love that. And I think what you're mentioning, Dan, I want to clarify that was mentioned that we are going to put a timeline to when we hope to achieve what benchmark. Is that?
So the two things on that. This information has always been used to help inform school improvement plans. And then it certainly informs district improvement and priority around professional development and where we're going to put things. The timeline we were really referring to is in those, in the bar graph. It's been hard over time to kind of really see what do the different bars mean. So that's why we tried to put in the years there. I think what's going to come together nicely will be your conversation later on, especially as you're thinking about your pairs, your subcommittees that you've created, because you're starting to talk about priority and what you're thinking about as a board. Schools and district staff will also be thinking about priority this summer. Where are they going to put their SIPs? And I think together, we might be able to bring that together to say, where do we want to put that priority? And then we can start thinking about setting those benchmarks that you're talking about on what do we feel like we need to move the needle on the most? Because we can try to improve everywhere, but I think that's going to have its limitations because of financial reasons and just bandwidth. So I think that whole prioritization and conversation is really where we're headed in a nice way.
Yeah, and I think if it's, but once we start to prioritize, then we can identify what resources we need. I think I like kind of reframe the conversation, and like we can't do everything, but it's like this is what we need to do and what resources do we need to get there. And because it's gone so low, and I think I heard, about saying that we have to kind of it's kind of a new baseline. I totally agree. But it is also, we don't have the luxury of kind of waiting 5-10 years to get back to the old base, to what we were used to. And so during this time, I think we have to be really intentional in moving quickly and urgently. And, education is changing so fast. And if we're kind of maintaining our pace, we're going to be left behind. And so I would also encourage for us to think about how we have these measurements like yearly or twice a year, once every 2 years or whatever. But how do we do more informal, more formative, and more process evaluations by the maybe the principals or the teachers, just to check in to see if we're on the right track, because we don't have the luxury again to go invest something in a year or two and say, hey, we're not on the right track, because we really need to pivot quickly. And I think that's, as a board, we just have to have that mindset of like, how do we build this in? And just, I saw your hand, but one last question is, I also think this is an opportunity, I think with new leadership you mentioned that we have, it's really an opportunity, because I hear this complaint a lot from parents. We're not that big of a school district, but we have, they feel, and I don't know, but parents feel that they have drastically different experiences across the schools. And so, I think it's great that we do a district plan, and then how do the different schools feed into that? So it's kind of like, here's our core competency or expectation, and people can do it slightly different, of course, any kind of implementation is gonna have everybody's flavor, the teacher's flavor and then the school flavor. But, we're not a big island. And when people feel that they have drastically different experiences, I think that's also a challenge that we really need to take this opportunity to address.
Excuse me, do you mean drastically different experiences going from like elementary school to middle school to high school? Or do you mean
Or elementary
the
school.
four elementary schools?
Yeah, the four elementary school, and they also mentioned that they don't feel, like I'm an educator, I love the 1, 2, 3, 4 grading, right, consistency generally, I love that. I'm loving it in that it's being pushed to middle school, so within the 4 elementary school, they don't feel like there's consistency. And then I think we need to do a better job in explaining from elementary how, let's say, no homework policy, which I actually also love, right? It's the elementary, but they're worried, like, what does it mean when they get into middle school? Okay, so now they're in middle school and they have this no homework policy. Then what does it mean when they go to high school? And if there's not similar expectations, then it's problematic. And so I think we either need to explain or better communicate to our parents how they transition, and that we're all on the same page. And that there is, so it's not like every school is kind of like independent. So I think there's a balance of having the administrators have their control, but then I think policy-wise, I think, grading-wise, I think that should really be looked at as a whole district strategy. It causes too much unnecessary conversation and frustration.
Sometimes it's an articulation challenge or deficit by our schools that as they're prioritizing one thing over another, there might be a principal or school who's doing a better job explaining something than others. And then others feel like there's conversation with parents, which is great. But the assumption is, well, I don't think we're doing that at Island Park because Mr. Hoffman's been talking about this. They might be doing it, it's just not where their emphasis is. But I think you're right. Let's look at grading. Standards-based grading for the elementary schools really began in kind of the pilot era of 2008. When I arrived in 2009, then we were really just getting the momentum going. We put some re-emphasis in it around 2012, and it hasn't been a real focus area for the elementaries, honestly, in the last decade. It's just kind of existed, but we've had lots of turnover. There's been conversation, turning to my colleagues in learning services, there's been lots of conversation recently about is now the right time in elementary to revisit that conversation. The middle school really wants to because it really fits in with what they have to do. And I think there's conversation there to start thinking about what tightening back up and saying, so I think some of those things are going to be, again, it goes back to where are we going to put the priority. There was a time when the elementary schools, school improvement plans, there was complete, it was completely decentralized. Every single one was very different. There wasn't any real collaboration between the two, maybe an adoption here or there. Then they got to a point where basically the board was getting, and they were writing one school improvement plan as if all 4 schools were one school. David, you probably remember some of those. And then they've started to kind of separate a little bit more. And they're having conversation right now. In fact, I was just in a conversation with 2 of the principals this week around the idea that there are some things that you should be similar on, but you also have 4 different schools. They are not exactly the same. And so what are also those areas when they look at the EES data, something that Lake Ridge is being told by their community might not be the same thing as Northwood. So there's got to be some points where they've got to be focused on what do they need to improve the most on. But then there's also areas of, I agree, how do we come together so that we are creating more consistency? Not that it's exactly the same, but that how we're articulating and what we're agreeing upon about what's best for students is a little bit more common.
So real quickly to just sort of circle back to the monitoring data. And my question is like sort of getting around survey versus perhaps like more quantitative data about, that maybe like that iReady could use as a diagnostic tool. Is that like one, like with survey data, like you have participation like issues, and then 2, like people can be notoriously like inaccurate in their own perceptions of whether they're being sufficiently challenged or too challenged, right? And sort of like other metrics, like I'm just a little bit like nervous about trying to get a whole picture of individualization from survey results. Like again, like not dismissing that I think like survey results like as a component, but I worry if it gives like a completely accurate picture in the entire.
You're absolutely right. And in previous fundamental reports, we have had more of that qualitative where the schools and the different segments have had vignettes and other pieces that have said, here's some of the things that we're doing within the school day as well as without.
Yeah, although I actually mean quantitative data, but like not in the form of like, this is data, but it's qualitative survey, like, in terms of sentiment. Like mine would be like, I would love to see like in the aggregate that, hey, 50% of our 2nd graders are learning a 1.5 years worth of math. Like that's something, to celebrate, right? Like that, and then to be able to break it down on like both ends of the spectrum and be like in this group, like, right, like the pace of information. But I would really love to see sort of those metrics of like, the beginning point and the end point for each student, and then how much improvement, how much growth we see in a year.
Which is some of that is part of fundamental 2. And just a reminder, when you come back together in August, you'll be doing your language review and your review of your monitoring and your metrics. So if there are some suggestions at that time, then it because if you choose to do this again towards the end of the year, it will give staff time to redo that, as we've done with other ones, as well as to what's the most impactful to really represent the fundamental as it's written, or does the board feel like there needs to be some changes to that too? So work to look forward to in August.
Absolutely.
Are we ready to move on? No. Go ahead.
So this isn't really a question, but these are questions that are happening in my head. So as you guys meet this summer, fall, to talk about this, I think this presents a really interesting perspective in terms of, what's the common denominator here, and it's COVID. And our every lives blew up, including our education systems, right? So when school moved to the living room, parents were a lot more, especially the young kids, a lot more aware of what was happening. And then, older students didn't have that outlet at school to be addressing their needs. Parents were hearing about it, right? So one thing that I'm wondering is, how much of this comes down to communication. And I think in terms of us gathering data from our families is decent. I use surveys for what they're worth in terms of big picture, but my question is, in seeing a lot of the ones that drop substantially, to me, it's how much are we communicating with our families about where their particular student is at? And I think that with all McIntyre and I learned, we'll present later in terms of one of the things we learned about with communication, but I know that these things are happening with technology in terms of the fact that our students, parents, struggling students receive early intervention and additional help at the school 2.12, which is shocking because I know that's not true, but if that's a parent's perception, then that's actually more of an issue, I think, than whether or not their student is getting at least as much of an issue as if they're getting the early intervention, because then parents can't be supporting that. And especially with the littles, the parents have to be supporting it. And then where students say, where was the one I pulled out? Teacher communicates with me on where I am, 3 point something, I'm not finding it right now, but they have Schoology and Skyward. They've got to go click on it. And so, I know that there's a handful of teachers that don't update things regularly, but I also know that there's a majority that do, at least in my experience, when I go click on it and look and see what's happening. And, I'm very hands-on in that. And I know, I didn't know in the beginning, like when my daughter was in middle school, like I could go in and see all the assignments she was missing and then be like, okay, you're telling me you don't have homework, but I know you do. That's parenting, right? That's not teaching, that's parenting. And I know that I think I'm not unique in the sense of, I want to be there to support my student as a parent, not as an educator. But if I don't know what's happening in the classroom and where my student might be struggling, regardless of what their teacher might be telling me, I can't be doing my part in parenting. And so how much of this is like, do we need to have a click on a student who goes, once a week, or, in middle school, it's Gator time. In high school, it's Islander hour. That's what they're calling them now.
Yes.
Things have changed. When they go and they click on once a week, they've got to go in and at least pretend like they're looking at Skyward or Schoology. And click on, not that they have to give feedback, but literally a click saying, I see what I'm doing. I acknowledge these are my missing assignments. And something that simple that, we're teaching them these executive functioning skills of where are you? Don't put it off till the last week of the semester. And every week we're saying, so that type of feedback and communication. I also know, like with homeroom and with other tools that our teachers have these tools and are looking at them and using them in educating our students. Are we providing, with IEPs, that's a formalized process, but that's still just once a year or twice a year.
There's progress reports for it every quarter or every trimester. But the annual review, where it's the big review, that's once.
Right. Every student deserves that. And I know how taxing that is. I'm not suggesting that we create an IEP process for every student, but everything's online now with this technology. And if a parent wants, why are we not sending out reports every trimester, every quarter, whatever it might be, saying, here's your student, here's their progress, and here are the topics that they're either excelling in or struggling in, or, brief summary. I'm not suggesting more work. I'm suggesting handing out to parents, or at least giving them a link of where can you see what's already happening that we know is in the system. That's their student focus. I agree with Tam. I think it's normal and natural. I don't think it's a negative thing that each one of our students has a different experience. Every student has different needs. That's the whole point of this individualization. I'm the only one with one, but I'm sure every parent here can attest that each of their children has different needs and struggles in some ways and excels in some ways. And so what I would love to be hearing about, after you guys have had these conversations, is how we can be communicating what's happening better. And I know that we're trying to, what's the right word? Not enable, but encourage our, especially older kids, to be owning their educational experience. But I think that most would be supportive of at least sharing. I mean, I want every student to be, you know, I know we're going through a big change in high school counselors. But after a meeting, you know, if a parent doesn't go to a meeting that their child can invite them to, their student can have them at. But it's great that when they don't, but, you know, is there some sort of checklist? Like, hey, we met today, we talked about this, you know, we met, you know, this, and then here's our plans going forward, here's our goals. And obviously we want to empower our students and give them the option of whether or not their parents receive that, in high school especially, unless it's a crisis, but we want to empower their, you know, them to do it themselves. But I mean, I would think that many, if not most of our students would want their parents, or be okay with at least their parents knowing like, hey, we talked about this because this is a concern of mine. So I think that that's a lot of the piece that's missing. And I'm not suggesting more work. I'm just suggesting communicating the work that's being done. And I think that with regards to parents that are really involved in their kids' education, so many just want to know that it's happening. They don't necessarily want to get, they don't want to involved in a negative way. Like they don't want to be driving it, but they just want to know that it's happening. And so just the communication of, hey, this is happening. And these are the things that you're working on, and valuing parents' perspectives. I mean, I know that my kids' teachers know her as a student certainly better than I do, but I know her as a person better than they do. And so it's like, wait, she's having a hard day, you know, this is what's going on. And I know that teachers rely on that information when they're getting it. So I just think this sharing of information about particular students, I find that much more useful than like this aggregate data as a whole. I mean, I think it's good at pointing out system weaknesses. But, you know, we're really looking at the fact of, we've got this technology, we have to start using it to make sure that, you know, parents come up to me all the time. It's like, well, this isn't happening. I'm like, actually it is. Go talk to so-and-so. So we have to do a better job at giving people access to that information. And then if they click on it, that's their choice. That's fine. But I would love to see those conversations happening and then kind of hear what you experts have to say about it.
I just want to piggyback on that to say that I think the focus on communication really is important in some of this, because as we do more personalization in education, it actually becomes less visible to parents. Because if your kid in middle school is getting to pick their book that they're doing a report on, or is being offered like 5 different ways to complete a math assignment, your kid is coming home and going, well, here's my book that I'm writing a report on, and here's my math assignment. The parent is not getting visibility into the fact that the kid had this like amazing choice of different ways to you know, choose to do their work. And so, and ironically, like to the kids, that's completely normal now. But so to parents, when they fill out a survey like this, and it's like, you know, my child is getting to, you know, do work at like a specialized level that's like personalized to them, they're like, no, I haven't heard about anything like that, right? So I just think that like as those things become normal in school, we just have to think about ways of like continually kind of communicating that to parents, because for parents, this is new, and they really, truly, I think most of them have no clue.
Yeah, if there was like an opt-in, you know, like if there's like an opt-in and then there's tools like, right, like these diagnostic tools, like just in a progress report, like I agree, I think it would be huge.
Is there a way to use the technology?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not extra work,
Yeah, exactly.
just
It's like
access
sort of
to the
like-
work that's
We all
happening.
get them for other things that we're in,
Yeah.
systems that we're in, that it sends us that email notification.
Jamie.
So just like there is the opportunity to have a board dashboard in homeroom, there is also the ability for parents to view it. I think what I'm not understanding is there is a way to continue to get more data to parents specifically about their students. In there, you know, they pay attention to their students' risk indicators, so nurse visits, absences, unexcused absences, grades, the 9 factors that we pull into our risk indicators. But I think I heard Director Lurie talking more like narrative, right? So here's,
You know, if there's, not across the board, but like if there's a particular area of concern, or if there's a particular area where a student is thriving, a narrative of your student is excelling in this, and here, you know, just want you to know this is an interest there, you know, I mean, nothing huge, And unlike I said, I'm really talking about, I know what's happening. I know a lot more, I think, than most of our parent community about what's happening in our schools and, you know, things I learned here and PTA and all that, but I that's not across the board. And I think it's, a lot of it is information overload. But I would love to not see an opt-in, I want to see an opt-out. Because I mean, whether or not they click it and open it, that's their business. I want everyone having access to it. Like with homeroom, I don't know if it's changed since, that's through elementary, right?
Oh, no.
Oh, it's all the way, so I don't have access to it.
No parents do right now.
Not yet.
I'm just saying,
Okay.
there is that opportunity,
Wait,
right?
wait.
We could be sharing that and they could send out reports, like our teachers get reports and depending on people's roles. You know, we have a variety of different ways in which reports are sent directly to teachers in their inboxes or staff members to support things like attendance, truancy, that kind of thing. We have the potential to do that for parents. I just don't know if that is really what we're looking at, like, are we looking for risk indicators and the data points, or are we looking for that narrative of, hey, your student is getting these opportunities, your student has chosen not to accept the challenge work this week or this month or this quarter, but I have been providing it, and those to me are very different, because it would be hard, you know, like in a high school or middle school setting, to send 150 individualized for every teacher. But the data could get there. And so I'm just trying to understand the
To
request.
me, and I think it's personal for everybody, so I don't want to give an answer, so I'm not representative of the board, but to me, it's a combination of both. I don't care about numbers. I want to know, I want to know more of the narrative topics, like my kid she's fine, she's doing what she needs to do, she's being challenged, she doesn't seem interested, like whatever it might be, I want to know, especially I think our kids are labeled in so many ways. I think that data just can exacerbate that. So I don't want parents having, the parents that are going to do this, I don't want them having more tools to say, you know, my kid, when we get the emails that are like, my kid's an honor student or straight A or whatever, I'm sorry, your kid deserves what they need. I don't care what their grades are. I don't care if they're an honor student. Every kid deserves what they need based on their own needs. So I would love to get away from, I don't want to see people using this as a tactic to like label or enhance whatever it might be. I want to see us addressing the needs of our students. So in whatever way that's the most appropriate, that's my personal opinion on what I'd want to see.
So far, we're actually talking about three completely different things. So I think that Dan is talking about using different forms of, like using data analysis to see how effective our instruction.
But then also like in the aggregate, but then also like individual. I mean, it would
Right.
fit in naturally to communication.
And that's a different,
like,
I'm just saying, I think with
transparent.
parent information, like, so, like, what's screaming out to me in glancing at these numbers without looking back is, I know so much is happening that is not getting communicated back. And I would just love to see, my personal approach with the communication back to families is individual, not aggregate, because that's where then we don't need to compare our poor kids to each other any more than we already do.
Right.
So
Whereas that's not exactly what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is not an individual thing where we'd be looking at like individual choices that a child is being offered or whatever. I'm just saying, when I look at the original statistics that we were presented with, I think that there's a communication gap there, because I think that parents aren't aware, and that's something that is like a grade level, maybe communication thing. Like, this is how we're approaching the choice of novels in 4th grade, or this is how we're, you know, like, here's like slice of life kind of communication, like, hey, let's take a look at today's 5th grade, you know, algebra class, and like, this is whatever math class. Also, I just wanted to know that we haven't heard from David yet, and I also wanted to draw people's attention to the time, because we still have a number of items to get through, and we have to finish this meeting before 10:30, so that we can have a tiny break before we go into our next.
Just real quick, like I think some of it when it comes to individualization, like data, like you can go down a wormhole, it can be very productive, but some of it is more basic. Just looking at like the sequencing of courses, like whether it's like language, fine arts, math, science, and the depth that we offer, like comparative to other school districts, because then that is just like a very high level view of like, this is the depth that we offer in a particular subject, which sort of is a natural like fit in obviously to individualization and like the ability to pursue pathways. So I don't want to get lost that like there are some very like just I think easy metrics that aren't quite as like in-depth discussions is, how to, what data and where to pull from and how to communicate that out.
And Tam had her hand up, but we haven't heard from David at all yet. So.
Well, I just go off what Dan said, I think there's multiple levels, right? So there's a system communication at the administration level. And this is where you do need to start to standardize across, and it's easier, you can only have a system level communication if there is some strategy and standardization across the system. And so that's what needs to be communicated, how does this all fit in as a large system? And then, this is another thing, Jamie, and you said this is for a different conversation. Now I'm throwing Jamie another one. But actually, Deborah brought up a really good, it makes me think about, like I said, the higher, like education is changing drastically. Our kids are like 2 years behind, right? Emotionally, like a ninth grader. You can't expect the same thing of a ninth grader before, right? And now, because they're just like very behind in their like management skills, things like that. And then parents are more involved. And I think it might be another 5-10 years before we kind of get in place again, right? And so it's an opportunity for the on a lower level of how, like Deborah said, how do we communicate with parents? But then it may not have to be, and when you say it's not extra work, actually it is extra work, but then this is an opportunity for us to think how, before I thought I would teach like, spend 90 minutes teaching content and I was good. But now I realize that actually if I cut my content in 60 and I spend the other 30 and just do one-on-one with students, that's actually more powerful long-term. And so this is something as a school district that we need to really think about. How do we deliver information? Do we need to spend that 90 minutes, just standing in front, giving them information? Or are there different ways, like, when we're talking about even our board meeting, can we present some of it asynchronously? Can we present some of it in person? And then do we spend that time now really putting part of our work as in what Deborah said, providing feedback? And then maybe on a school level, letting parents know that, hey, every week the teacher is spending 15 minutes with your students giving feedback. And maybe that's all we need to know, is that they are getting that feedback time with teachers and not have to like be told to us like exactly what the feedback was. So that's kind of, so I think part of it is we have to reimagine the need right now. And do we, can we deliver information to get the outcome and not the traditional way of 90 minutes of straight, face-to-face instruction. But I would encourage what Deborah, what I'm hearing is spending more of that teacher feedback with their students. And as long as I know that they're getting that and if he's not doing this on him, if I know that he's meeting with the teacher, then that's really great. And I think that's what parents are actually wanting post-COVID. They're really needing that. And I think we need to, if we want to, and perception is everything, because perception is why people are leaving, right, whether it's reality or not. And so we have to really take in and build that, help people to see things in a different way.
Right, and the early intervention piece, just like, I mean, it is extra work, but things are happening already. I just don't think they're very effective. Shoot out an email and say, I met with your student today regarding this, we're working on it. That's it. I mean, a parent, like maybe 3 out of 10 might have more questions about it, but a lot, I think, will just be like, oh, awesome, you're on top of it.
Yeah.
So and then it's like, oh, they're actually working with my kid, even though of course they are, but.
David?
Yeah, I guess I've had the benefit of having 3 kids through all the grade levels, and I appreciate the idea of expectations around teacher-parent communication. I think that's certainly come through, and what I can expect at each of the different grade levels, certainly much tighter around elementary school. Maybe there's a little bit more helicopter parenting occurring at elementary school. And the intent of that is to dissipate by high school. Clearly, sometimes the helicopter parenting might continue into high school. And that, that's where the parent cares about, is my student taking advantage of every opportunity placed in front of them. And I think that's where there's certainly some disconnect amongst parents and teachers around that. So I see that. I appreciate the individualized communication. I do hope my hope is actually that what I loved about homeroom and these type of tools is it gives teachers access on a daily basis, super easily to every student in their class. So it becomes easy to send these emails out and meet their expectations. I think that's great. If that can be done, if those expectations can be set, an understanding between the teacher and the parent occurs as to the degree of parent involvement in all of this. I think you've nailed it. I do think the board, in terms of getting the aggregate view, is great. It helps us understand. There are kind of two pieces. One is where are students in aggregate sitting? Two would be what processes do we have in place to communicate to parents? And we don't want to dive into the details, but just at a high level, know what the expectations are for parent-teacher communication. I think from a board perspective, that's great. And then I think the highest level perspective, I think Donna already spoke about in her update to us, which is the branding and marketing of everything we do in our school. The opportunities presented in the 5th grade or the opportunities presented in the 12th grade are generally useful to all parents to see. And so that's, the social media we've been talking about, the high level branding we've been talking about. So I don't think that's necessary for individual teachers to be doing it, because as a school, everybody's broadly interested in that and broadly interested in understanding what's going to happen to my kids in middle school while they're still in the 1st grade today. So I feel like certainly on the overall school branding, we're on progress. I think as we talk about what metrics the board wants, I think we've got a kind of a couple here. One is to understand the processes and make sure that's consistent. Two is to do the aggregate level homeroom analysis of growth for students. And then third one is board understand how the teachers and parents communicate what expectations we should have. Yeah, I feel like we've had a good discussion around this. There's been a lot here, but so that would be my takeaway.
That's a great summary, thank you.
This is a really easy ask, thanks guys.
That's right.
And summary.
We got it, 6 weeks.
This is an action item, so do I have a motion related to this?
I move we find the superintendent in compliance with Fundamental 1.
Second.
All in favor of finding the superintendent in compliance with Fundamental 1, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. That passes by a vote of 5-0. Thank you all for the very interesting discussion. Moving on to partial governance process monitoring, we have Word Policy 1800 OB10 instructional program, elementary core literacy adoption, K5.
So we do have some staff presentation on this. This is the second reading. The board did hear about this and see this at their last meeting, and it has gone through all of our policies and procedures that are necessary when there is a new instructional materials adoption. No.
Yeah, I mean, we presented last time, so.
Update, did you receive any other feedback from community or staff or anyone between the last piece there? And then I know we put into a previous board update, just information. There was questions about a district, I think it's Palo Alto down in California. We put some information in based on our conversations with them. I don't know if there are questions about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess like just a few remarks. So like I brought it to, I brought it up in the meeting in May. Because Palo Alto, like of 25 teachers, 20 abstained. And they piloted 3 different materials and they weren't happy with any of them. I think the backstory is it's a little more individualistic circumstances. It was basically Palo Alto was out of compliance because there had been individualization at each of the schools, or at least at many of the schools in these language labs. So they had to choose a curriculum in order to satisfy their legal obligations. But then there was, the feeling that a textbook doesn't fit when it comes to individualization. So I think what it communicates is that like core textbooks, I mean, one, it's required and you need some uniformity, but I think there's real questions. right, around the degree into which individualization is possible within a textbook. And if the same textbook is appropriate, across levels, or if at times, like looking at North Shore, for example, and I'm not sure that's the right one, but I'm just throwing it out there. They have an alternative course book for certain highly accelerated learners. That one of the takeaways for me, at least from Palo Alto, which is a very similar district to our own, is that there are issues with core textbooks, perhaps, aimed at national medians or state medians, particularly when you have a district that has a more unusual profile like our own. And maybe like with technology, there's more individualization and ability to accelerate grade levels. And it sort of ties into the previous question about like metrics in order to monitor that. But to me, like that was the takeaway. It wasn't like a defect with the textbook itself. Like maybe it was the best of the worst options and you have to choose one. But it raised larger questions about individualization, to which it's good for the students, to which it's empowering to the teachers, and how to balance those like sometimes competing interests. So I'm, comfortable with the recommendation. I mean, it seems like it's a good textbook, but I think, an interesting conversation.
Just as a reminder to the board, to the community who are watching, there is no single core textbook for high-lit. It is.
Or reading, yeah.
Yeah, for the reading, I mean, for the benchmark.
Yeah.
We're on benchmark now. It is a series of texts that are there. It is not there's not like the anthology that you open up.
So with reading in particular, less so than math, the way that most curriculum is designed at a foundational level is that you're working on a skill, and that skill can be applied to really any text that allows for it. So that was actually one of the reasons the teachers liked this tool, was because it did that. It gave them more options. And one of the things that was sort of a non-negotiable for them was more access to text. So that's one of the things that we built into our adoption, is through this company, they have additional text, whereas the lesson calls things out and says, you might want to use this text instead or whatever. That was one of the things teachers liked about it, to allow for that choice of text that is appropriate to the students that sit in their classrooms.
And teachers are allowed extensive supplemental curriculum. We've given them supplemental curriculum in addition to this, correct? And we have done so over the years.
Yeah.
I think that the challenge is going to be then for parents to know about its availability. I suppose it goes back to the previous conversation. And then to what degree do we want uniformity across schools if teachers in different schools are able to do different things for individual students? And then I assume it also, how do we deal with training for teachers for supplemental curriculum? How does that work?
Yeah. So in terms of their supplements, they have had training on all of those things. When we rolled them out. So they've gotten all of that piece of things that we have existing. So one of the things teachers wanted to do was retain their access to their existing phonics tool in the event that they needed to use it for either extending or, supporting, whatever the case might be. So they wanted to retain that piece of it. They also have Hagerty phonemic awareness, which is a tool that they largely use and used a lot during the pandemic, which is helpful in our scores, I think. So they've gotten the training on that piece, but in terms of training of the broader curriculum that we hope to adopt, is that the principals and I sat on Monday and outlined the year's worth of PD that we would be providing to teachers. And that includes everything from phonics instruction, small group instruction, to assessment and use of that data. So we have a year's plan of PD by the company, but then also what we're calling mini PDs that we are designing that will help put the pieces together. So how does it all fit as a comprehensive program, even though we're adopting only one piece of that?
And then our high cap curriculum, is it the same? Is it different? And is it available to everyone?
It is. So yeah, we're doing a universal adoption. And then part of what we're doing is looking at, with Jamie, the curricula that's used in our high cap programming, which is largely supplemental by nature. So we're trying to figure out where are the places where that might be needed. As I said earlier, just the idea that we have to do in part, sort of making sure that we're using it with fidelity to ensure that we know what we need. If we don't use it with fidelity, we won't know what we need. So we have to use it first with Fidelity and over the course of the year have checkpoints along the way to check in with teacher groups around what it is we need to do differently as we move forward.
And then the previous adoption, just as a reminder, a big selling point on that and a real area of emphasis was the access to what we call basically a level library for every classroom, so that there's level text in classrooms. They're going to retain those in their classroom, so they will have all of the level text they've had before, plus the new ones they're going to get in benchmark. So for the first time since, my time in the district, every classroom is now going to have basically a full level library. So you can level up and level down based on the standard. And so what we want to focus on is the firm goal is the standard or the area of emphasis we want. The flexible means is we're going to have kids who are reading 2 and 3 grade levels ahead, some who are reading levels behind, but they could still be working on a similar skill, but in different ways on the comprehension side. But on the phonics side, which is on there, we also have the previous materials plus new materials.
Yeah, and I know we're not talking about math just yet, but that's been an ongoing conversation with our high cap teachers, and we'll need to circle back to it in August when they're back on contract, in terms of what makes the most sense for the learners in their classrooms.
Sounds good, thank you.
Any motion on this?
I move we approve item 3A of the instructional program for elementary core literacy adoption.
Second,
Thank you. All in favor of approving the adoption, please say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. That passes by a vote of 5-0. Next.
All right, next up.
Same question
Get on
on,
us.
no, same question on numeracy. Any feedback from community, anything or updates from there?
No.
Okay.
Teachers are excited.
We know we have some who are waiting anxiously from this because if it's approved,
They want.
they get access for the summer,
Right.
so.
Digital access.
Yeah.
Right away.
So,
Yeah, like another thing for me, except I think as we've discussed, I think the diagnostic tools and the ability to start experimenting, I would certainly encourage teachers to do so. If there's any means of sending progress reports, particularly at elementary level, I think it's a huge win.
Anybody else? Comments? Okay. Do we have a motion?
I move we approve the instructional program for elementary core math adoption.
Second,
All in favor of approving the adoption, the math program, please say aye.
aye.
Aye. All opposed, please say nay. That passes by a vote of 5-0.
Before you move on,
Is the order button right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but
Sell. Or buy. Before we move, I just want to publicly and in front of you, the board, we've, Nova's done some incredible work on this and we are moving her from being an assistant director to director because of all the work she's been doing. And as we're not backfilling my position, there's going to be more coming there. But Nova, just looking at you as a colleague who I've been working with for almost will be a decade next year, right? Up here in learning services, but just your leadership on these, I know you've shepherded along Julie Newcomer too, as she's learned the process. And even though she was leading, I know you were a big part of that. So your leadership on this has been absolutely steadfast and landing us in such a great place, along with letters and some other stuff. So I just want to thank you.
yeah, and this is one of those things that I think the public sees like not even the tip of the iceberg. They see like the chunk of ice sitting on the tip of the iceberg, but I know it's a huge lift. I know it's a ton of work by a lot of people. So thank you.
And lots more to come.
Yeah.
Adoptions are huge professional learning for the next couple of years, because remember, we're going to do the literacy in the lower grades, the math in the upper grades, 3 to 5, and then the next year they'll flip. So within 2 years, all of our elementary teachers will, in their really two of their major core curriculum will have new instructional materials that they'll be using with students. So lots to learn, lots of diagnostics and lots of pieces to put the puzzle together over the next couple of years.
And thanks to our community, the foundation is going to be a huge supporter of this spring campaign. We couldn't do this without it. The levy, being able to add technology through this too, and the management from Ty and Andrews on that. So, you know, we are absolutely grateful for that.
All right, next up is Spanish, BP 1800 OE10. Yes.
Let me just quickly say on these next two items, we did send this information to the board prior to the meeting. A little bit unexpected, they are listed as a first reading, but again, it is June 23rd. And I think that staff would really appreciate action prior to August again, so that the materials can be in their hands in plenty of time for the start of the school year. So just want to front load with that and then move to the adoption of UW High School Spanish 103.
And I'll let you talk about, actually, you can talk about both of them and then they have to vote separately,
Yes.
but I'll let you talk about them separately. About 3 days before our last IMC meeting in May of the year, Andrews, I think, was at the high school and was working with Alma and the others, and he sent an SO, you know, Fred, any way we can get Spanish going on this? And sometimes, as you can see, there are texts that we get lots of lead time on. Other times, when we're working with entities like UW, we get a week to work on. So, Alma, thanks for really just jumping in, partnering with us on that, and so I'll let you take it through.
No, thank you. I know this was late notice. My training with the University of Washington was at the end of May. So that also affected how we are approaching this adoption. During the training, I really got to see how the curriculum aligns with not just our values, but how it's student-centered. I'm talking about individualization for students, and their interest. They have choose your own adventure. They can get the different Spanish regional audios ready and available through the platform. So all of these adoption, AP and 103, are available online, which also helps students just click from Schoology into the textbook, especially for AP. Both of these textbooks have been used by the program in some ways, but University of Washington gave us 2 years to change to the new textbook. Before we were using Gente, they gave us some time to adopt and train to the new curriculum. For AP, I am just so excited for the student feedback. And that feedback has impacted enrollment. 2 years ago, our enrollment for AP was 5 or 6 students. Last year, 15 students. Next year, 44. So quoting my administrators, students guide enrollment and the classes that we offer. And that is just so evident for most of us that were at graduation. Those alumni that passed through our program have made this possible by telling their experiences within the program and how they're benefiting from it, not just by the units, but also the enrichment that they have with pocket and with grammar and how do you teach a language through Zoom. We face those challenges, and this curriculum will put us in a way that students can take agency, but also see different populations being represented and their stories, histories, and culture being brought through a different light. Yes.
Sorry, a few questions. Thank you for your presentation. Like one, when it comes to foreign language materials, is there like an online, I assume like interactive component? And then two, when we're considering curriculum, do we also look at what other neighboring school districts are utilizing? Not that it's always the best, but is that part of like the consideration? And if so, like, other school districts, are they using similar, or, why these in particular?
Let me talk broadly and then you talk the specifics. Broadly, particularly with AP, we definitely are talking with other districts, not just here, but also nationwide, because AP kind of, in many courses, they kind of say, here are kind of 3 or 4. You go to these conferences and you start talking to your colleagues and you realize that like 1 or 2 are above and beyond their best aligned. And so there's a lot of collaboration from there. The UW ones are a little different because we're really following their lead on that one. But even texts like the math, we're definitely talking to districts far and wide. And then we also get lists from the companies as they send us their samples. What other districts locally, regionally, or across, the nation are using this, so we can reach out to them, and that's part of our conversations. How about for these?
Yeah,
in
so
particular?
these 2 classes, 103 and AP, is bringing university college level classes to the high school in-house. For an example that you brought up, Palo Alto, students that wanted to have access to college level classes from Cali, Cambridge, would go to Foothill Alianza or do Stanford programs during the summer. So for us, we're bringing these programs in collaboration with the College Board and UW in-house. If a student completes 103 and AP, there's, depending on the scoring, they get a 6. A 5, they get up to 25 units. That's a minor in Spanish. And these are classes that are they're equivalent to Spanish 4 and 5.
So kids that are graduating from the high school, they could have equivalent of a minor in Spanish by the time they graduate.
Yeah.
From UW.
Yeah, then we have the same thing for Chinese, like, there's like a AP, before AP Chinese.
It'd be great, like on the
Chinese.
website, like maybe, to like sort of advertise that.
Yeah.
Right? It seems like a very like big win in terms of to be able to distinguish from other options, like when parents are considering.
Just so you know, they have to opt into that. They have to actually pay for the credits through UW, but most choose to.
And there's,
yeah.
there is some strict criteria that we have to have in place for our teachers have to be.
Something like the
specifically.
MISD, if it chose, for instance, could even perhaps cover the cost of like that, the opt-in, right? Like there wouldn't be a problem with that.
Okay, it's like
We have-
$25.
Yeah, there's,
Oh, no, it's not.
Oh.
It's like a few $100s. It's like maybe $500 or something for the Chinese one. It was $600, but
we work with families who qualify for free and reduced lunch and some of that to help with tuition assistance.
Yeah. I was gonna say, just so you know, since you haven't had kids through this level yet, that those credits are also, of course, good at other colleges. So you can get, you may not have a minor necessarily, but you can get, credit towards not only your language requirement, but towards graduation at other colleges, which is great for kids who haven't opted into doing like, running start or something like that, who are just in their normal curriculum to be able to earn college credits. But as I understand it, this curriculum is actually like required for the UW program, right? So it's not like we really have a choice about this, but you're happy with it?
I am very happy.
Okay.
One difference that we have that Palo Alto, or we do not have a lot of heritage speakers. So we need to make sure that all the content, all the language is comprehensible, and we give supports. And part of this beautiful process of individualization is that the students can also click on the links. So if they miss a grammar lesson, they don't remember, they can click on those supports and not just choosing the audios and, oh, I'm gonna go to the Caribbean, I'm gonna choose the Caribbean Spanish or the European Spanish. That diversity is also so meaningful to the Spanish speaking world, that representation. Questions? We don't have a lot of heritage speakers. Hopefully we get more. But the stories, mainly it's about the holistic approach to language and the comprehension. Our students are great writers in English, and they have great vocabulary. So it's just bringing that together and like doing the positive transfer of of skills that they already have. This curriculum aligns with social science, English, the superintendent's equity
Fundamental.
work and fundamentals, and the Washington Ethnic Framework and Standards. That is very important, reading those skills.
Thank you so much.
I move we approve the instructional program for textbook adoption for the UW High School Spanish 103.
Second.
All in favor of approving the adoption of the instructional program, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say nay. That passes by a vote of 5-0. Next,
I move we approve the adoption for AP Spanish Language and Culture.
Second.
all in favor of approving the adoption for Spanish, AP Spanish Language and Culture, please say aye.
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 All opposed, aye. All opposed, please say nay. That passes by a vote of 5-0. Congratulations, and thank you so much for all your hard work.
Thank you for bringing this to us. It's, all the work is what you did, and it seems like it, it makes our job easy to
Yes.
approve something when you come with the things that you did in order to approve it, and then your enthusiasm for what it is.
Yeah.
So thank you for making that easy for us.
Thank you so much.
And with this, we've also, we don't need a second. meeting, we'll be able to-
You've taken action on it now.
Yeah.
So you can get the purchase button.
It's five.
Andrews.
Sorry.
Bye.
After to the high one.
Oh, he wasn't in here.
Oh. Okay, let's just get through the rest of the stuff we've got consent agenda.
I mean, we approved the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. That passes by a vote of 5-0. Thank you. And we're skipping superintendent announcements. Does anyone have any urgent, like, board announcements, inquiries, or reports?
Nothing urgent. The only thing is something I mentioned in previous board meetings is about, there is a committee that's going to refer for potential adjustments to the regionalization factor when it comes to state apportionment. Like, we'll frankly, probably hear about it first through collective bargaining. And if in the sort of off chance, anything does happen, please let me know. And then sort of, I guess, try to coordinate with other schools in a similar position and make our voices heard. But that's really the only item.
It's an OSPI committee, and as those updates come through, we can certainly make sure in July.
Yeah. If there's an adjustment, I think that we'll need to act perhaps to just make our voice heard. But I don't anticipate that from what.
Just super quick, I know we're short on time, but I just don't want the end of the school year to go by without expressing gratitude to our entire staff from at every point. And we've all been able to do that at our individual recognition with the schools, but it has been a really, really tough year on a lot of respects, and our staff has worked, I think, tirelessly to support our students and families, and just want to acknowledge that our superintendent is coming up on the last few seconds of her last regular board meeting for her career as a non-interim superintendent. And so just want to express gratitude and really looking forward and excited about the years to come and the planning to see a more normal and natural school year, hopefully, whatever that might be. But just a thank you to everyone. It's hard work, and you guys are doing it really well.
Yes.
I don't imagine there'll be COVID updates, but I do imagine COVID's still going to be here, and it's still going to have some attention that's going to have to be paid to it.
I also wanted to just acknowledge that this is our first regular meeting since high school graduation, and I just wanted to thank everyone that was involved in planning and making that happen, both as a board member and as a parent of 2 seniors. It was a pleasure, and thank you especially to Kristen Fritnall, who is like a goddess among women for how she kept everything organized and moving. I had multiple people come up to me and say, who did the choreography? Who basically planned this all? And I was like, that is who, so yeah.
Just, I know there's only 4 people watching, so, but it's. Yeah, they'll be watching a lot, there'll be a lot of clicks after this. But Tony Kuhn and Carla Rimmer and the crew, they put together a 3-5 COVID vaccine clinic. It'll be next Thursday. Then again, there'll be the booster in July. It'll be at Northwood, but we're trying to continue to support the city. We'll be communicating with the city out to the community, but we're continuing to try to do our part as a district to help out everyone in the community. So thanks to them.
Thank you. Okay, so we don't close this out, right? We're just
We'll
going-
adjourn at the end of
Yeah,
the study session.
So we are gonna recess for 10 minutes to like kind of recharge our brains. So we'll be back at 10:37 to start the study session.